Lovely, thank you. Okay, so to get started, I'll read our land acknowledgement, and then we can get into the session. So I'd like to start by honoring the land that we are on, which has been the site of human activity since time immemorial. It is the traditional territories of the Huron-Wendat, Anishinaabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River First Nations, on which I recognize that I am an uninvited guest. Ontario is covered by 46 treaties and other agreements and is home to many Indigenous nations from across Turtle Island, including the Inuit and the Métis. These treaties and other agreements, including the One Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, are agreements to peaceably share and care for the land and its resources. Other Indigenous nations, Europeans, and newcomers were invited into this covenant in the spirit of respect, peace, and friendship. We are all treaty people. Many of us have come here as settlers, immigrants, newcomers in this generation or generations past. We are mindful of broken covenants, and we strive to make this right with the land and with each other. I would also like to acknowledge those of us who have come here involuntarily, particularly as a result of the transatlantic slave trade. And so I honor and pay tribute to the ancestors of African origin and descent. So thank you for allowing me to read our land acknowledgement. So in terms of our session today, as I mentioned, it is called Combating Racism Through a Healthcare Perspective. It's part of TSLIP's anti-racism series. So as I said, today is part of our workshop series for the newcomer serving sector, for the newcomer serving sector that focuses on anti-racism. So the aim is to strengthen relationships and bring awareness to important issues through professional development opportunities for sector staff of all levels. This event today will look at the impacts of racism and also look at recognizing instances of microaggression and covert racism. So it'll introduce these concepts, identify how it impacts folks, and provide anti-racist and anti-oppressive tools to support sector staff on how to address these issues when they do arise. Today, we are joined with two wonderful speakers, Dion Sinclair and Suzanne Niaga. Dion Sinclair is the Vice President of Clinical Operations and Chief Nursing Executive for the Center of Addiction and Mental Health, so CAMH. And Suzanne Niaga is a dedicated community organizer, activist, educator, and EDI specialist. I'll pass it on to Dionne, who will introduce herself, provide her bio, and then when Suzanne's portion comes up, I will introduce her and allow her to take it from there. So please go ahead, Dionne.
Sorry, Toby. Actually, Danny is available if you could introduce Dionne with a few words.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, you're on mute.
Hi there.
Hello.
I'm going to log off on my phone, which is how I started this. Okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes, you can.
Great. I didn't think I would make it, to be honest with you, so I'm actually really impressed. I'm a little bit out of breath because I ran up the stairs to get to my computer and turn it on. And I really, really wanted to introduce Dion, so I was really, really trying hard to get here on time. And so, as you know, never trust the TTC, right? The schedule doesn't mean a thing. It's like fiction. But I really wanted to introduce Dion because several weeks ago, when Nadia had raised the idea that we would bring some guest speakers in, I thought of somebody else, and the person just wasn't available. They sort of changed their job. And so I just said to Nadia, I would keep thinking about somebody in the mental health sector that would really fit the bill. And then I sit on a constituency council at CAMH. We meet twice a year, and we're put in groups. There's about 60 of us, and we're put in groups at tables of 8 or something. And Dion was on my table a couple of meetings ago, and we're just doing our business as we do it. And then it dawned on me that the perfect person to present to this group is Dion Sinclair. Apart from the fact she's an accomplished Black woman, She's also a really interesting person. So I'm going to I've been instructed to do a brief bio, and Dion, your bio isn't even that long, so I don't know how I could even synopsize this short bio. But I'm going to do a brief bio, and then when she presents, you'll see what I mean. I'm excited to hear her speak. So as Vice President, Clinical Operations and Chief Nursing Executive at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, Dionne plays an integral part in helping the organization achieve its goals towards integrated and equitable core and supports for people with mental illness. She leads the program that supports those with the most complex illnesses and is dedicated to improving access to excellent patient care so that people may live their best lives. Dionne brings high energy, a strong work ethic, and a positive attitude to all that she does. Dionne is also a member of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, Black Nurses Task Force, and an active member of the College of Nurses of Ontario Employer Reference Group. As a certified healthcare executive, Dionne's previous leadership roles include multi-site director, diversity and cultural advancement at Aurelia's Soldiers Memorial Hospital and South Lake Regional Hospital in Newmarket. Dionne has held many leadership roles in her 35 years of clinical experience, including clinical director, medicine program at South Lake Regional Hospital, director of home and community care planning and strategy at Northwest Local Health Integration Network, clinical director, complex continuing care, St. Vincent Hospital, Bruyere continuing, I mean, the list goes on. Dionne is a mother of 3 beautiful girls, an entrepreneur, a motivational speaker, which we'll learn today, and an award-winning fitness professional. I learned some things about Dionne when I saw this bio, and Nadia sent me some additional information. In addition to this, Dionne is undertaking her PhD in nursing administration. In her spare time, this is what I learned about Dionne. In her spare time, if she has any, she is a competitive bodybuilder. I just came from the gym, so we need to talk some more, Dionne. Motivational speaker and a member of Jamaica's national curling team. The most interesting thing ever, Jamaica's national curling team. Is that like the bobsled team, like Diddy curling in Jamaica? Yeah. So Dionne will tell us more. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you the wonderful Dionne Sinclair.
Okay, well, thank you very much. The check is in the mail for that amazing introduction. Good afternoon, everyone, and it is a pleasure to be here. I usually start off with all my talks by saying, do not let my youthful good looks fool you. I've been at this for a very long time. I'm going to share my screen and just share some of the work that I've been doing. So I'm going to go slideshow. There, my screen is good. Awesome. So, as mentioned earlier, my name is Dion Sinclair, and seriously, here's about the good looks. I am a registered nurse, but I started off as an RPN way back here in 1986. Anybody remember 86? Anyone? Okay. I'm an immigrant from Jamaica, and so we're going to talk about Jamaica in a little bit, but that's me right here. And the other Black person I went to school with was my brother, Steve. All through public school, the only other Black child in my classes, no teachers, was my brother Steve, which was amazing because he was my protector. We had each other's back, so it was amazing. I shared this. This is me graduating from Fanshawe College. And over here, I'm graduating from York University with my master's in nursing. This is my mom, who's my superhero. She pushed me to keep going even on the days I wanted to quit, which was more times than I can remember. I'm sharing this picture here. This is me looking extremely glamorous with a nice, I think this was a wig, but I'd have wigs or weaves. I'll share that later to say how sometimes in this country, especially, you go along to get along. So you literally try your best to fit in. Assimilation, some people will call it. Not anymore for me. And then last but not least, this little picture over here. These are my daughters. And the smallest one is the oldest one. Her name's Althea. She's a registered nurse as well. She's 34, graduated from Queens. The middle one, Pam, she's a social worker, graduated from U of T with her master's in social work. Brianne is the baby. She's 24. She is an actuary at TD Bank. And don't ask me what an actuary is. She told me, but I forgot. So, and then here, this is us back in Jamaica. That's me, very precocious 2-year-old. And this is 43 years later. Myself, my brother, and my sister were all taller than Dad at that point. So I usually share pictures because, one, I love pictures, and you can get an idea of Dionne's span of life. So something that most people do know is racism. And what I wanted to talk about is some of the physiological impacts of racism. You might go to the doctor saying, you know what, I got high blood pressure, I'm depressed, I've got some GI problems. And it could be that you're ill, but from impacts of racism, or the people you work with, the people you've talked to, it's like they have these neck and shoulder pain, and it could be because they're impacted by racism, which in this country, there's a lot of, and it's vicarious racism. You could get it through just watching TV and watching another Black individual get murdered by police or murdered by some random vigilante. And vicarious racism, you're sitting there, but you're feeling it. When George Floyd was murdered, I felt it. I actually felt it very much. And I shared with my CEO at South Lake at the time, I said, your Black staff were not okay. I sent off an email to leadership and I said, we're not okay. You need to do something. You need to either put out a statement, because the murder was just so raw to me when I went back to work. People were going about their business, but I could not get over it. So I sent the email off to the CEO. I've never sent the CEO an email before. A couple hours later, I got an email response back that the CEO would like to see you in her office. I went to the office. I thought, you know what? I hit send. I'm going to just put on my big girl pants and I'll go to the CEO's office and say, yes, Arden, her name is, to her credit. And she goes, Dionne, I read your email. And you know what? You're right. We need to do something about racism. We need to do something about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the organization. I don't know what to do. And I'd like you to go out and do something. And it's like, whoa, wait a minute. I just, you're the boss. You need to do something. It's like, no, we want you to do something. That's how I became director of diversity, equity, inclusion. Doing a PhD, I went to the literature. I wanted to find the best evidence, the best practice, what should be done. And reading through the literature, I quickly found out that there's a lot of information out there, but nothing that really had a system to help others understand racism and culture and increase cultural competence. And when I looked at diversity, it said diversity is only a piece of it. Diversity is numbers. However, if you have 100 Black people working at CAMH, even in leadership, do they feel valued? Do they feel appreciated? Do they feel that that is a place they belong? Do they feel welcomed? Do they feel that they have an equal opportunity to rise up in the ranks? You know you have DEI correct when it doesn't matter who you are, what your cultural background, you feel valued and appreciated in the space, and you have an equal opportunity to move up. It's not favoritism or white supremacy that gets you where you want to go. It is an equal opportunity for everyone. So I want to put that out there. So one of the things the literature says, leaders are the ones who set the tone for the top when it comes to equity, diversity, and inclusion. The executive team, they have to model the behavior. What I'm saying to everyone here, you are the leaders. I'm actually talking to you, you're the leaders. Leaders have to address the cause of inequities. Do you know what an inequity is? You don't have to answer. Leaders have to remove systemic barriers in order for the system to get help or move forward. Leaders have to move systemic barrier. Do you know what a systemic barrier is? All right. So the IDI, it's an intercultural development inventory, and it's a core concept is all about culture and understanding culture as the foundation. That's all I want to share there. And what the IDI is also talks about this continuum of where people land in on that cultural spectrum. So some people are in denial, some people are in polarization, minimization, acceptance, and adaptation. I'm going to go through each of them and share with you, but here's the story that most organizations do. They want to be more inclusive, more equitable, more diverse. So they bring in either the focus group or bring in their HR people, and they do the focus groups, they do the town halls, they do the survey. Anybody with a thumbs up heard about that? They get a whole list of all the great initiatives, DEI initiatives to be implemented. Sounds familiar? All right. So here's the list of initiatives. You've done the focus groups, you've done the town halls, all the surveys are completed, and they're handing them over to leaders. But for a lack of a better example, the leader is sitting in a Donald Trump mindset. what happens to all these great initiatives? Anyone? You do not have to answer. So it's finding out where the mindset of that leader is and helping them grow to the next level. So I have a trigger warning for the first slide because it does show pictures of an Indigenous residential school. Oh, all right. So the first slide of culture is denial. When people are in denial, differences may appear chaotic and bewildering, and people avoid topics of race and racism. They're very indifferent and they don't see anything outside their own frame of reference. So 100 years ago, the colonizers came to North America and denied our Indigenous brothers and sisters their heritage, their music, their language, everything. They literally tried to assimilate them. Organizations can be in denial, and when organizations are in denial, they have a one-size-fits-all approach to doing things. And issues of diversity and inclusion, race and racism are likely to be ignored. And you'll hear, this is the way we do things around here. And best practice is tradition. And people from marginalized groups are exploited. So they'll say, but we have lots of diverse employees in this organization. And when you look, those employees are in food services, they're in housekeeping, they're in maintenance, they might be in the gardening, something like that. But they're not in leadership. They definitely don't have a budget. They don't have any power or decision making. And so when you look around, yes, you do have diverse employees, but where are they? Do they hold any power? Okay. The great news about when organization or people are in denial is your learning focus has to shift. You do not send them to anti-Black racism training. What you do is you help increase their cultural awareness, and they have to be able to see people from visible minorities or visible differences. So I send them to watch a cricket match. I've actually done that with some VPs. They have hockey and baseball and football, but did they know about other sports? They get to try foods, like try the jerk chicken, try some Jamaican patties, try a shawarma, listen to different music. If you know anything about Jamaicans, we love reggae music. Well, there's Hindi music. If you get invited to a South Asian wedding, I tell people go. Look, listen, and you learn. So before COVID, international potlucks were amazing. Place for you to just learn about other cultures. It was safe and not too, I won't say intrusive, but it's a safe space where you can actually just get exposed to other cultures. Your developmental question is, can you begin to see other cultures as every bit as rich as your own? It's not better, but every bit as rich as your own. And you do it through food and art, movies. I've told people to go watch Crazy Rich Asians. You think privilege is what your thing, it's like you need to get outside yourself. Watch Parasite if you want to learn about South Korea. I wish this picture was a very old picture from back in the 60s, but it's like 2 years old. Polarization is the next mindset on this continuum. And in what happens with polarization, you have an us versus them mindset. And polarization defense, us versus them, we're better than them. And the sad part is there's a polarization reversal, which us versus them, and they're better than us. And this shows up with, they did a study with little kids. They have little Black kids and they show them this white doll. Well, the white doll's prettier, the white doll is smarter, the white doll is everything. And you'll have people that look like me that will bleach their skin or straighten their hair so straight that they think us versus them, but they're better than us, so I want to look more like them. It happens. There's explicit stereotype, extreme hate groups, white supremacy, a strong judgment of others, and others are perceived as a threat. There's an overemphasis on differences, and people cannot see anything that they have in common. So what you have to understand is underneath all that anger is a fear of losing power, losing privilege, and losing their way of life. I have a video about how you can get polarized people together to talk to each other and actually come together to discuss their differences in a very safe way. So I'll share that later. But what you do for people in polarization is team building exercises and discuss things. So I always share about my girls. Anybody with thumbs up, anybody here have had teenagers or you have children? Any of those children messy? They've got like their clothes all over the floor. You couldn't tell which one was clean, which one was dirty. Yeah, I see that. So look at what we have in common. I also complain about gas prices. In the States, enslaved people were supposed to have 400 acres and a mule. With gas prices, I just want the mule, keep the acres. No, I thought that was funny. All right, so you do storytelling. You say, how many people go to Costco and actually leave there with spending less than $100? We all have that in common. Anyone? All right. So it is, the developmental question is, how do I find something in common between me and them? And there's so much we do have in common. How do I uncover my own prejudices, my own bigotries, and my own biases? It's important for you to look inward to say, where do I get my ideas from? Was it how I was raised? Was it the church I went to? There's many ways that you have to look at yourself, find out where are you on this continuum, and you have to grow up the continuum. So minimization is what we call the golden rule. Do unto others what you would like done to you. You want people from all races to be treated equally. Isn't that what everyone wants? Oops, I don't know what happened there. Uh-oh. Can you guys see my screen?
Yes, I can see it.
Did it move? Because for me, it moved.
It did move, but it's gone back to the first slide, like the cover slide.
Okay, hang on. My apologies. I'm not sure what happened there.
No problem.
There, something happened. I was looking for this slide. You two know this slide. So before I go on, I want to go back here because this is a super important slide. In the chat, I want everyone to tell me, what do they know about Jamaicans? What do you know about our food? I mentioned some of it. What do you know about our music? I mentioned some of it. Are we the fastest people in the world? You can say yes or no. Before I went on, I was supposed to talk about culture. Now my slide finally showed up. Okay, nobody knows anything about Jamaicans in the chat? Oh, okay, I've got some. What do we know? Irie, okay. What kind of food do we eat? Okay, well, I will share. Jerk chicken, Jamaican patties, oxtail, rice and peas, right? Music, reggae, but dance hall. A lot of people forget dance hall, all right? And our flag is one of the most famous flags in the world next to the US. And you know what? There are some Jamaicans who are slow, that can't run that fast. What do you know about Jamaican values, though? This is the important thing about culture. What do you know about our expectations, our attitudes towards aging, our approach to problem solving? You need to understand a lot of things that we know about people are at the top of this iceberg. What you need to do to understand and appreciate others is getting to the bottom of the iceberg. Understanding our values, our expectations, our learning styles, the norms, our thought processes. And in order to do that, you have to build relationships with everyone and anyone you want to get to know better. It's the top stuff at the top is all stereotypical. And yes, we are the fastest people in the world, like fastest men and women, like, but there's some of us who are slow. There's some of us who are slow. And not all Jamaicans like food spicy. I'm just saying. The one thing I share on this side is about Canadians. All of us here are Canadians. We're progressive, diverse, multicultural. There's 2 official languages, 60 indigenous languages, 200 other languages. And we value culture, age, our values, our culture, age, religion, abilities, and we're there for each other. This is from the Prime Minister's website about Canadian culture. Usually when I go into this, a lot of Canadians will say, but I don't even have a culture. I'm just Canadian. It's like, no, these are Canadian values right here. Democratic and respectful. I'm going back to the chat. I want to hear what everybody. Oh, see, diverse. People have yam, banana, dumplings, 2 chicken, beautiful weather. I love it. All right, seasoning your food. See, real music. Thank you for participating. All right, so I'm going to go back. So we've talked about this. We're in minimization, the golden rule. I show this picture to say in this organization, the CEO loves the color black. Do unto others what you would like, right? So it didn't matter if you're in a wheelchair, a hijab, if you're pregnant, if you're male, if you're female, the dress code is black. in organizations that live in minimization, they've got that mindset. They value equality. They're super accepting. They will say they don't even see color. However, they overemphasize what people have in common. See, they're all wearing black. They think they've arrived and they project their own values onto others, thinking they're universal values. So I'm going to be very vulnerable and say, once upon a time, I used to project some of my values onto others. I thought people with full sleeve tattoos were something must be wrong. Who would do that to their body? Tattoos. Coming from Jamaica, in the church, growing up. But guess what? My daughters, all three of them now have tattoos. And I didn't stop loving them. The world did not stop spinning. I might have a tattoo or two myself, but once upon a time, judgmental me, projecting my values onto others, it was like, what? Like literally, I don't know if anybody noticed when they show the picture of my daughter, she's got a full sleeve. All I do now is saying, don't ask me for money. I know how much that sleeve costs. So anyway, I digress. But sometimes we do project our values onto others. If somebody drink and you don't drink, it's like, oh, how could you do that? Or the reverse, if you drink and it's like, why aren't you? We have to be conscious of our values, and are we projecting them thinking, well, they're universal values? Sometimes we lack cultural self-awareness. Where did we get these ideas from? I grew up in the church. So for the longest time, I didn't even have my ears pierced. It's a thing, some Jamaican communities, if you're Jamaican on here, you'll understand. It's one of those things. So, but those are values that when you bring them, you should not be projecting them onto others. Another thing about organizations that are in minimization, they say they care about diversity, but it's not as diverse as it could be. They recruit for diversity, but they onboard for similarities due to an emphasis of comfort and fit. And it's okay to look different if you are as much alike as possible. So I was Black, but I had the wig and I had the suits. I had those Hillary Clinton suits on. And in organizations like this, they no longer stereotype in group. The oppression is very personal. So you won't hear, oh, Black people talk a lot and they're loud. You'll hear, man, that Dionne, she talks a lot. She doesn't, you can't even get a word in edgewise when she's talking. We have somebody here, her name was Jill. Jill was quiet. Jill was just lovely. Jill was a great fit for our organization. Dionne, I don't think Dionne's a good fit. You see the emphasis on comfort and fit? It's no longer a group thing. So you'll hear that, and you'll hear, this is the way we do things around here, and it's the right way. Usually I slip and say it's the white way, but it's the right way. Non-dominant staff leave part of themselves at the door, and they have a go along to get along. There's an exercise coming up, I'll share that. And that doesn't lead to great retention because you can only do that for so long. And then it's like, that's it, I'm out. I need to preserve my mental health. I need to preserve my sanity. Members of non-dominant cultures, they experience a pressure to assimilate. That's where people will change their names to make others comfortable. They will change their appearance to try and make others comfortable. We say that you need to intentionally include people from diverse background, or you unintentionally exclude them. So in the organization, you take a look around and you make sure that there are diverse employees. However, they still have to feel valued, appreciated. It's a place they belong, they feel welcomed, and they have an equal opportunity to move up in the organization. There's no favoritism there. The learning focus for minimization is increase cultural self-awareness, manage the feeling of guilt, emotional discomfort, and when dealing with issues of race and racism, and ask yourself, what are your values? Seriously, what are your values? Are you projecting your values onto others? And then how do you learn to see what you currently don't see? And how do you take responsibility for your own identity and your own cultural lens? Next is the second to last is acceptance. And acceptance is, if minimization was a golden rule, acceptance is called the platinum rule. Do unto others what they would like. And you're curious, you're appreciative, you value differences, you see others from their own perspective, and you find race and racism and other forms of culture interesting yet challenging. However, 20 to 30% of the population, they're ready to hear all that information about unconscious bias, anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism. However, despite understanding racial injustice, people here are less likely to take action. They get stuck in this phase called analysis paralysis. It's like, oh, I should do something, but I don't know what to do. And I don't want to do the wrong thing. So a lot of people end up doing nothing. They frustrate you because you're going, why did you say something? Oh my God, didn't you just hear that? And it's like, I know I heard that, but I don't know what to do. And I don't want to do the wrong thing. And so to help, we say that you need to develop confidence and humility, lean into all the complexity that is race and racism. It is complex. There's nothing easy about it. You have to learn culturally specific information coupled with practical application, and you practice it. So I say, if you're female and you're invited to a mosque, you wear a headscarf when you go in, and you don't walk to the front saying, well, I'm Canadian and I should be able to sit where I want. It's like, no. We're going to sit at the back where all the females are, and we're going to look, we're going to listen, we're going to learn. And when you're done, you leave, you take your headscarf off, and you're richer for the experience, but it didn't change you really. I always joke and say, if you get invited to a Baptist church, learn to clap on beat. Seriously, that's what they do. Or if you go to an Indigenous community, you need to leave your watch and your phone at the door. If you're ever invited to a band council meeting, the meeting is over when the last person gets to have their say. So don't be looking at your watch every 10 minutes going, I had another appointment. No, that's disrespectful. You'll never be invited back. And word will spread about how disrespectful you were. So you have to learn these practical application. But I encourage leaders that I've worked with, go visit the mosque, go visit the temple, whether it's Hindu, Sikh, Jewish. Go to the Baptist church, go to a South Asian wedding. You get exposed to culture, very safe environment, and you look, you listen, you learn. And for all those in acceptance, you have to maintain an ethical commitment in the face of relativity, because people are going to tell you, why are you bothering? It's no point. You know, nothing's going to change. Things are changing. You're looking at a vice president and chief nurse, where in Ontario, in Toronto, there's like 2 of us, but 2 more than I've seen in my last 36 years of nursing. So last but not least, adaptation is a temporary shift in behavior made in order to be more effective. So cultural differences are very obvious. You're more accurately predict your behavioral outcome because you're a great diplomat. You look and you listen first. You're confident, you have humility. You're likely to challenge systemic and institutionalized and structural racism. You don't know how things are going to work out, but you're willing to make changes, and you learn and you adapt. So the only thing that happens when you're in this developmental phase, you're very tired of people that are in denial and polarization. You don't understand, why can't they understand what you're seeing? So what I share with people is Mennonites, they're in community. They're not exposed to many other cultures. It's their one big community. When they leave and they come to the big city, it is overwhelming when they see others. So they may not be in adaptation, definitely may not be in acceptance. They could be in us versus them, or they could be in denial, because all they've heard about community is what they hear. A lot of the communities don't even have the television or cell phones to see what's going on. So sometimes when you live in your own little bubble, you need to get exposure to other cultures and try to understand and learn and appreciate that they are innovative, have different perspective, but just as rich as your own. So for the adaptation learning focus, be very clear about your goals, manage your frustration and exhaustion, and apply that power analysis. Who in the organization has power? Do they look like you? Practice your learn the concrete action. So you're going somewhere, you find out from someone, what do I need when I'm going to that Indigenous community? I've been invited into community. Do I need to bring a gift? What do I say? Where do I, like, all those things, you have to take the learning and make it into concrete action. Here is the exercise. This is a 2-minute exercise. Everyone needs to participate. You need a pen and a paper. You're going to write down 5 of these social identification categories. Yes, I said you're going to participate. Daniel, yes. Everyone on here, because I will be picking on people. Suzanne, yes. Tim, Ruben, It's Yana, Elena. Write down 5 things that are really important to you. They identify who you are as a person. Daniel, I'm going to come back to you. When you have 5, let me know. That's when we're going to start. I absolutely do not need to know which 5 they are. Is it Shanzi? Sanji?
Changiz, yes.
Chanjis.
Yeah.
Thank
G
you.
sounds like G in green.
Okay, thank you. And Miriam. Awesome. Does everybody have 5? These are you got it, Daniel? All right, everyone. Take a good look at the 5. I don't need to know what you wrote down. I need you to cross one of them out. And now I'm going to ask Susan, you crossed one out? Come off mute. Tell me, how did that make you feel?
Yes. I crossed.
You don't have to tell me. Don't tell me what it is. Just tell me, how did it make you feel?
I won't tell you what it is, but I think the one that I crossed out is the one that is least important to me, or
Okay.
least based in my identity. It sucks having to take it off the list, but it isn't a core foundation of who I am.
All right. So I'm going to talk to Chen. You crossed one out. How did that make you feel? You can come off mute.
Oh, okay. You want to see what's your question?
Oh, if you wrote down 5 and you took one of them away, how did it make you feel taking one away?
I'm feel very sad.
Oh,
Not feeling good.
all right. Last person, Danielle, how did that make you feel? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry.
It was a little challenging to make the decision, but I think I agree with Suzanne. It was probably the least important when it comes to my identity. But it was it was the first one I put on there. So
okay. Thank you very much for participating. I really do need everyone to participate. We're doing this again. This time I need you to take 2 away. Cross 2 of them out. Cross them out. Take them. And I'm going to pick on 3 other people.
is that 2 more or just another one?
2 more. 2 more. So you'll have 3 of them crossed out. Miriam, did you cross 2 more out? Miriam? I'm asking if you could come off mute and tell me, how did it make you feel crossing 2 more out? I'm not sure if you can come off mute. Oh, there.
It made me feel like I'm not fully myself.
That's fair. Yeah. All right. Tim Maxwell, how did it make you feel?
Losing something.
You're losing something. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Kevin Lee, how did that make you feel?
It made me feel I similar to others. It feels like I just kind of lost something from my session kind of thing. Yeah, very similar to how others feel.
Okay, I'm really sorry. I know it's hard, but I thank everyone for participating. I'm going to pick on 3 more people. You'll have 2 left now, though, right? You got 2 left? I need to cross 1 more out. That's it. Only 1 more. Only 1 more. And I'm going to, okay, Chanji.
Yeah, by crossing that 1 more, crossing out 4 of 5, what remains makes me equal to everyone, basically. Or I lose my specific identity by those 4 that I crossed out.
You're losing your identity. I'm so sorry. Thank you for participating. Is it Rubin? Rubin. No, your mic. Okay, I understand. Who? Yana.
So I
I can see that everyone is feeling like they lost something. But for me, when I see at this social identification categories and I'm crossing out something, it feels like that's something that I do not really judge people by.
Okay, that's fair.
So by losing more categories, it's like I feel like I'm closer to them, actually.
Okay.
Not really, judging them by some categories.
All right, no, that's fair. And one more person, Laura.
As everyone else kind of pointed to, it feels like you're erasing your identity. It's like you're losing parts of yourself. And it's the things that make me.
Okay, no, and that's fair. And thank you so much for participating. You are absolutely correct. I'm asking you to take away parts of yourself, which it makes some people feel one way and others differently. What I want to tell you about the last thing that you have left, that does give you the most pride and joy, but sometimes it can give you some angst and frustration, correct? Possibly. So here's what happens, and you probably are aware of this. When you're a brand new immigrant to this country, you're from Syria, you're from Afghanistan, you're from the Middle East somewhere, you get here and you're a doctor, you're an engineer, you're a nurse. They say, take a look at your education and cross it out. You don't have Canadian experience. I can't verify that you went to medical school, so you could drive a taxi cab. How does that make you feel? If you work in Quebec, you want to go live in Quebec and work for the public service. They say religion, spirituality, no hijabs, no kippas, no cross, no turbans, cross out your religious affiliation if you want to work for the Quebec public service. When it comes to language, nationality, your name is Makembe Mutombo, and you've put in all your resumes all over, and you've got a PhD, you are qualified. You've never gotten a call back. You take your resume, you change your name to John Smith. You get 60 callbacks. You got 40 interviews and you got 20 job offers. Nothing else changed on the resume except for your name. You literally change it to make others comfortable. Or age, I always say Lisa LaFlamme. She couldn't go see her hairdresser during COVID, so she let her gorgeous gray grow out. There's some young guy at CTV who's crossed her out because of age. What happens is, in this country, some people that you're working beside may or may not have the name, or they've taken their PhD off their resume because they've been told they're overqualified. Their experience and their education from countries of origin not recognized, because this is Canada and, well, you didn't have Canadian experience and you need the experience to get the job, and you can't get the job unless you have experience. Does that sound familiar? It's so important that you understand how you're making others feel with the systemic barriers that are put up just for job seekers, with the inequities that are put there because finally you're in the building, but you are not advancing or moving to the next level or progressing because, again, there's these inequities. Oh, we didn't go to the same school. We only hire Harvard grads. I'm making that up. But those are the things that happen in organization. And in order to move people forward, you need to dismantle some of that. I'm good. So thank you for participating. I usually say, you see how it made you feel, and it's a paper exercise. Imagine others, newcomers that don't feel welcomed already, going through that, changing parts of themselves just to fit in, just to go along, to get along. Subada Baba. I can't pronounce your last name. You've raised your hand.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's okay.
No, tell me how to pronounce it.
Oh, it's no, it's Sudaba.
Sudaba. Okay.
Yeah, like Sudaba Dabadu.
Okay. Thank you.
When you I agree with you. And when you were saying about like immigrants coming from specific areas in the world and their credentials are not accepted, that is not only a problem and sad for the newcomer, but it's also it's not so good for the like Canada and the economy, Like, for example, there are doctors here in Canada who are very, 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 I would say probably even more better than the doctors here, because their school is so strict, and they're amazing, but they can't practice. But we are in need of doctors. Like, we are really in need of doctors. So why are you making this such a long and difficult and costly process when we can just use our assets that we have?
Yeah. The great news is that they are changing legislation in Ontario. We are hiring nurses and doctors on temporary licenses while they go through the process to get certification in Ontario. It's a brand new thing that just changed. So if you know any doctors or nurses who are internationally trained, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. Okay, so there is one more thing.
I heard a great interview with you with Poppy
this?
Harlow,
Yes.
where it was a terrific interview, and you talked about finishing Harvard, finishing HBS, going to Morgan Stanley. You had all the learning, you had all the knowledge, you had all the drive, but what you didn't realize was the importance of networks or of how to connect with people or how to build these relationships. Can you just talk a little bit about the impact that had on you or how you came to realize that?
I realized that being smart and working hard wasn't enough. It still wasn't getting me at the top of the class, despite how smart I thought I was and despite how hard I was working, because you cannot outwork me, Dan. But I realized that, there was somebody who had to be behind closed doors arguing passionately on my behalf. But at the end of the day, while performance currency gets your name on the list that's being discussed behind closed doors, when your name is called, if no one else in that room can speak on your behalf, they just go to the next name. And it has nothing to do with your ability to do the job or nothing to do with whether or not you deserve top bucket or middle bucket. But because no one in that room speaks on your behalf, by default, either you don't get chosen for that specific opportunity or you end up in the middle bucket. And that was the aha for me. And that's when I realized that there was a missing component in my success equation, and it was a relationship of a sponsor, as I started calling it way back in 1990.
And how did you find a sponsor?
I started realizing that the sponsor, number one, had to be within your organization, unlike a mentor. Your mentor can be outside of your organization, but they just need to understand your context. But that person needed to be in the organization, and they needed to have a seat at the decision-making table, and they needed to have some juice. So once I figured that out, then it was, okay, who can I identify? And I started thinking about who has access to my work. It doesn't necessarily have to be your boss. It's great if it is, but it just needs to be somebody that will have credibility behind closed doors when they're talking about you. So any exposure to your work gives them that credibility.
Sometimes you run into people who feel that once they discover this path, they'll be accused of being nakedly ambitious, of being, overly career focused. Did that ever slow you down?
That's right. And let me tell you what I tell people who worry about that, because when I say that, people say, oh, but what about if people think I'm brown-nosing? And you must realize that there's not one role in any industry where you can succeed without a relationship.
Absolutely. Does everybody understand that? You need to speak someone's name in a room where opportunity is being discussed. So if I'm somewhere, you don't have to be in that organization, not anymore because of virtual learning. But if I'm somewhere and someone needs a director, a VP, I can say, you know what, you need to talk to Nadia. Nadia is amazing. She's exceptional. She'd be a great candidate for that position. Instead of being just a coach or a mentor, a sponsor is somebody speaking someone's name. And if you want to help either a new immigrant or someone that is a different culture than yourself, you can be that sponsor for them. Does that make sense? Does that help?
I heard a great interview with.
This is the last one, and then I'm done.
I would describe my political views as the new right.
I say that I'm left.
Feminism today is man-hating.
I would describe myself as a feminist, 100%.
I don't believe that climate change exists.
We're not taking enough action
action on climate change. I think it's about time these people got off their high horse and started looking for credible problems that actually exist.
It's absolutely critical that trans people have their own voice.
That's not right. You can't, you know, you're a man, be a man, or you're a female, be a female.
Women do need to remember that we need you to have our children.
Could I be friends with someone that says a woman's place is in the home?
Right, okay, well, I'm an expert at flat packs. If you have any trouble, just watch me.
So it looks like I've got your instructions here.
I think so.
Let me help you.
Let's just that bit there.
Describe what it is like to be you in 5 adjectives.
Okay, frustrating.
Dedicated.
Opinionated.
Lucky.
Ambitious.
Offensive.
Solemn. I have ups and downs.
Strong.
I want to say attacked, misunderstood.
Name 3 things you and I have in common.
We're both male, we're both confident, and we're both loudly spoken.
We know each other better than people who've known each other for 10 minutes should.
You seem quite ambitious and positive, and you've got this really, got a glow. Do you know what I'm saying? Your aura's pretty cool.
I'm sensing, are you former military or something?
People have said that, but there is no history. So are you then ex-military?
Yeah.
If you're ex-military, I'm very proud of you already.
Well,
so
I grew up in a bit of a rough state. I've experienced homelessness. I've known what it's like to have absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm definitely most grateful just for life.
We've only just met, but I think you're the sort of person that would listen to me and we'd have a discussion rather than argue. Yeah, you could hang out with, man.
Let's go. My chance.
Goodness sake. You're right, mate. Fitter than I look.
Perfecto.
Oh, yeah.
There you go.
So basically, I think we just put a bar.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here you are. Each take a bottle and place it on its corresponding markings on the bar.
Attention, please now stand to watch a short film.
Feminism today is definitely an excuse for misandry, man-hating.
If somebody said to me that climate change is destroying the world, then I'd say that is total piffle.
So transgender, it is very odd. We're not set up to understand or see things like that.
I am a daughter, a wife. I am transgender.
I feel like the battle for feminism definitely isn't done. The fight is never going to be over, if I'm honest with you.
You now have a choice. You may go, or you can stay and discuss your differences over a beer.
I'm only joking.
You had me for a second then.
Well, I'm having a drink.
I'm having a drink.
Yeah.
I want to discuss.
Beer.
Yeah, beer and discuss.
Cheers.
At the end of the day, mate,
About
I've
reaching
enjoyed
out to
working
people,
with you.
yeah.
And, you know, even if you wanted to convince people about your point, the productive thing to do would be to sit down and have a beer.
Engage.
I've been brought up in a way where everything's black and white, but life isn't black and white.
Yeah, I'm just me.
I share that video. I'm not promoting Heineken. They haven't paid me anything. I just wanted to share how team building, doing something together can take polarized people to the point where they can sit and discuss. A lot of times, these are real people, they're not actors that are in that video. And they had very polarized views. However, they got to know each other intimately. They got to know what's at the bottom of the iceberg. Then they can sit and discuss. Does that make sense? So those are, one, you can be a sponsor. 2, get to know someone who's different, look different, from a different culture, different background, and get to know the bottom part. Not that Dionne's Jamaican, she likes jerk chicken and listens to reggae music. Dionne is also an Olympic curler. Who knew I can curl? Those kind of things. You get to know people on a more intimate level. Mom of 3, and they were messy teenagers. Look at what we have in common. So I hope that is helpful. It's a different way of looking at it. It's a personal journey when it comes to your cultural awareness, cultural competence. Learn that we're not all at the same stage, but you meet people where they're at. If somebody's polarized, you talk about what you have in common. If they're in minimization, projecting their values onto you, you meet them there, but you also move beyond that to find out, hey, look at all what's different. And this is what I need. I hope that's helpful. I'm looking to Nadia, I'm looking to Danielle. How are you guys? Okay.
It was fantastic. Thank you so much, Dionne. Would it be okay if we let the group ask some questions? We have a few more minutes.
Absolutely, yeah.
If anyone has any questions, do you want to put them in the chat or raise your hand? Sumaya?
Yeah, thank you, Nadia. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks for a great session. And I really appreciate the honest conversations here, because many times when we talk about, racism or not feeling the sense of belonging, what I've noticed here, specifically in Canada, after working across the globe, like 4 continents and multiple countries, that people don't have honest conversations. People don't talk about the type of prejudices or discrimination they have gone through as a newcomer, and especially in their job search, and even after getting or landing a job while progressing through the corporate ladder. So my question here would be that how do you still speak up or raise your voice for other people, other newcomers, or other people of color who go through the same process which you have gone through as a newcomer and still face several times during your day-to-day interaction, but not being outcasted just because you're raising your voice? And I would give a very specific example here. So I am very active on LinkedIn. And when I came here, like for 16 months, despite being leaving my executive job and having American or European education, mostly American or European work experience, I have been told that you will not get any job in Canada just because you don't have enough Canadian experience. I did have 1 year of Canadian experience working with Fortune 100 companies as well, but still I faced that challenge. And now when I speak about it, just to advocate for the other newcomers, and now I'm again on the executive level, I have been told by several of the LinkedIn contacts and my network and well-wishers, don't do this, otherwise you will be outcasted. And I usually receive threats in my DMs that why are you doing so? If you feel that Canada is so bad, why don't you leave? I never said that Canada is bad. I made a decision to come here, but I'm only raising my voice for other people to make it heard so that the industry knows the opinion and they can do something to improve it. So my question here is that if you are someone who is very honest and who wants to speak up for not only yourself, but for other people as well, how to do that in a gracious manner and not being outcasted and not being considered for the further business or professional or personal opportunities just because you're speaking up for other people or raising your voice?
Mm-hmm. So I do have an answer to that. I'm not sure if you're going to like my answer. Jamaicans, we talk. I talk. I'll just put just me. All the other Jamaicans, they don't say much. I was speaking up and it did get me outcasted. It did get me labeled. So what I do now is my actions speak. So in my organization at CAMH, I've got a director of nursing practice. She's Black, she's Jamaican. She's qualified for the job, master's degree, 30 plus years experience, never had a chance. So when I posted, I cast my net very wide. My actions is what's speaking, because some people, they won't hear. But if you're in an executive position and you have the opportunity to bring anybody in for a developmental assignment, I would do that. If you have the opportunity to be a sponsor for somebody, speak someone else's name in a room where they're talking about opportunities, I would do that. Actions speak a lot louder, because people who don't want to listen will never listen. They'll always have something else to say. So now we do have a very diverse leadership at CAMH. I won't say it's all me, but I led by example by saying, no, we are going to not just post on our website. We're posting on LinkedIn, we're posting on Facebook, we're posting on Instagram. So our candidate pool is much broader. The other thing we're doing here is we're hiring for attitude. We'll train for skill. The credentials are great, but Others have lots of experience, transferable skills. We're not getting innovative ideas if you need a PhD for a lot of things, because not everyone has the opportunity to go for that PhD. Not everyone has the finances to go for the PhD. Not everyone had those grades to get into grad school to go for the PhD. It didn't mean that they're less smart. It just meant the opportunities weren't there. Does that help, Sumaya? Sumaya?
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it.
If you're able to do something for others and don't talk, like just get the actions, your actions will speak loud. Okay, Tim, I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I get very frustrated because I see so many organizations talking about EDI and then seeing how they treat their frontline staff, and the leadership is generally white, middle class, and it's just, it frustrates the hell out of me on a personal level too, because my wife comes from another country where as a consultant she could be paid $100 an hour. And here, even people in her own community say, oh, no, this is a good rate. You should accept $20, $25, you know? It's just like, she's one of the smartest people I've met, and gets treated by smaller minds like a fool sometimes, you know, and it's just really infuriating. And I've seen that among our clients as well. And when I worked as a job developer, trying to get people into places, just like, we even brought Barb Hall into Learning Enrichment Foundation to talk about how the requirement of Canadian experience is discrimination.
Yeah.
And still, it's still there, right? And it's like, there are cultures out there that have been around for thousands of years, building bridges, building cities. And you're going to tell me that this country with less than 200 years under its belt has something more to offer than those cultures? And that's just nuts. But that is white supremacy. That is colonization.
Yep. And so things are changing slowly but surely. It took a crisis. We had 20,000 registered nurses in the province that were actually registered with the College of Nurses of Ontario. However, because they came to Canada on a work permit as a caregiver from the Philippines and Nigeria and Jamaica, they could not work as a nurse because their work permit said caregiver. While they were here working as a caregiver in other people's homes, they went through all the hoops and they got their registration from the College of Nurses. On paper, everything, they were registered nurses, but the federal government had to change their work permit to allow them to work other than caregiver. And we were desperate for nurses. We're going through a COVID pandemic, people working double time, overtime, burning out, quitting. And we had 20,000 nurses that could not work for a lack of the permit that they carried, said work permit caregiver. That's how they came to Canada, and they couldn't work as a nurse. And we had to fight the government to change that. So what I did, I gave every single one of them a job letter, not everyone who came here, a job letter to saying they have a full-time permanent job, registered nurse, CAMH, and that got their work permit changed. A lot of it doesn't make sense. And same thing with doctors with experience. Yeah.
Thank you so much for those that asked questions. And Dionne, thank you for this wonderful presentation and really going through the impacts of racism, cultural competency and awareness, and really giving us a better understanding of that. As we mentioned at the beginning of this session, we do have two speakers. So our next speaker is Suzanne Nyaga. I really hope I'm not mispronouncing your last name. Please correct me. And so I'll read her bio and then let her take it from there. So Suzanne is a dedicated community organizer, activist, educator, and EDI specialist. Suzanne has nearly 10 years of experience in community development and carries a Master of Social Work degree from Howard University. Suzanne carries expertise on the manifestation of systemic racism, anti-racist and anti-oppressive best practices, and ideating systemic solutions through program design, implementation, and evaluation. Centralized in all she does, Suzanne is passionate about creating a world that is systemically and interpersonally embraces difference. So thank you so much for being here, Suzanne. And she'll be diving into concepts or diving more into microaggression and covert racism for us. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for that intro. And thank you, Dion, for speaking and sharing with us. I feel like I was taking in so much from you. And so I'm just excited to add on to that and complement what you have already said. If I could please be provided with sharing capacities.
Yes, absolutely.
Some of the slides that I have prepared.
Mm-hmm.
But while we wait for that, I just want to thank folks for being present here today. As Timbit mentioned, a lot of my work is focused on supporting systemically marginalized communities, starting off with the advocacy and organizing and grassroots organizing, but shifting to systems. Because at a point in my career, I really realized that somebody built these systems, and therefore we do have the ability and the power to shape and build them ourselves. So I'm looking forward to today because as we're talking about systemic barriers and systemic bias, we often forget how subtle the nature of that is. And when we're talking about microaggressions, they're not quite as micro as we want to say that they are. So accurately named, I have named my workshop for today, Not So Microaggressions, because they do have a drastic and long-lasting impacts that disproportionately harms folks who are navigating this world carrying systematically marginalized identities. So a little bit about what I'm hoping to cover today. We already did a land acknowledgement, but I'll just add a little bit to what was already shared. Then I'm going to hop into some introductions and community guidelines. So I really want to create a space where, one, I know who I'm talking to and in what capacities you folks are influencing work in the immigration sector, but also two, making sure that we can define what safety and presence and support looks like in this next hour that we have with each other. And then we'll jump right into microaggression. So really looking at defining some key terms, hopping into understanding the impact of microaggressions. How do they impact folks? How do they impact our systems? And then also giving some space to looking at the root causes. So why are microaggressions a thing? Where do they come from? What are the root causes? And before we leave off, I also really want to make sure that I can highlight some actions. Once we have the information, we understand we have this new knowledge, what is that change behavior we can then commit to? And what does that look like both as individuals, but also organizationally? And hopefully we have enough time where I can also open it up for questions that may come up for folks and also just reemphasize some of the key takeaways that we may grasp from today. So land acknowledgement was already provided in the beginning. I have a land acknowledgement here that recognizes a lot of what was said, but I really loved the essence of that initial land acknowledgement, giving space to the fact that we exist on Indigenous land, but also recognizing the nuances and the ways in which we were brought to this land. And I think when we work with immigrants, it's really important to also recognize that piece of how colonization has impacted the experiences of Indigenous communities globally. And a lot of us who have come to this land, myself being an immigrant, we've come here because we are ourselves displaced Indigenous folks impacted by colonization and what that looked like in our homelands. And so when I think about land acknowledgements and give land acknowledgements, I always encourage folks to think critically, not only about, okay, we read an acknowledgement check mark, but think about what does it look like to stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks on the land in which we occupy? What does it look like to do this work as an individual? What does this look like to do this work when we're supporting movements? What does this look like to do this work organizationally? And some examples of individuals, we can always learn more about Indigenous communities, especially Indigenous communities here in Canada. As somebody who went through the Canadian school system, I can tell you we learn next to nothing. And as somebody who is the child of immigrants who came here and didn't go through the Canadian system, I can tell you that even that process of getting citizenship and all of that, very little information is provided around the real histories of Indigenous violence, genocide, or even just Indigenous cultures and practices and way of life. So as individuals, we have to take ownership of our own learning. And then organizationally, looking at the ways in which our actions, our practices, our policies, our systems are disproportionately impacting Indigenous folks, both in positive and negative ways, so that we can also shift and adjust. I always think of land acknowledgements as invitations for us to learn, grow, and share more about what this land means and how we stand in solidarity with Indigenous folks. And in the essence of learning, sharing, and understanding a little bit more, I would love to learn who is in the room with us today. So if you want to unmute your mic, if you want to pop it in the chat, I would love to understand your name, your pronouns, your position or title if you want to share it. And then also, what is something that you are hoping to learn today? So really focusing on that question. What is something you're hoping to learn today? Again, feel free to pop it in the chat or unmute your mic if you would like. Pop into the chat. Amazing. I see some folks sharing their name. I'll give you some time. I know it takes some time for me to type up. Anti-human trafficking, yes. Welcome, welcome, folks. And what are you hoping to take away from this conversation today as we're focusing on microaggressions as well? Amazing. Community development worker, Ukraine newcomers is who you work with, the settlement agency. Welcome, Alicia. How to handle microaggressions, yes, for sure. Welcome, Daniel. Awesome. Well, feel free to continue to populate. I always love to inform the spaces that I create by the folks who are also in that space. So when we're talking about microaggressions, when we're talking about covert racism, it is such a big topic. We could be here for literally a week just discussing those two things alone. So I always like to know what are some of the takeaways that folks want to walk away from, so that those are some areas that I can also pull into our conversation today. But as you folks continue to populate the chat, the last little bit of housekeeping I want to do today is just speak to some community guidelines. So this is what I do: workshops, facilitations, training. And what I found really helpful is to name the expectations that we are holding people accountable to with the spaces that we create. I'm a big believer that you can't hold people accountable to expectations that you have not named. And so in creating spaces, I also want to speak about what are some of those guidelines? What does safety look like for us? What does presence look like for us? And really speak to the group dynamic that we want to build. So I have started a list and I will read it out, and then I'll invite folks to just add to it. Feel free to pop it in the chat if there's anything else you'd like to add when thinking of what safety looks like for you for this next hour as we talk about some difficult things like microaggressions and covert racism. So the first thing I have here is taking the lesson and leaving the story. And this is a note on confidentiality. So people may share their experiences, their knowledge, things that they've gone through. And it's really great to take the lesson from what they're sharing with us, but leaving some of that identifying information. So not repeating names or positions or jobs unless you have their explicit consent. So you can say somebody shared something and I really learned this and I took this away, but we're not going to repeat who that person is and the conditions of their story unless we have their consent to do so. Also, using I statements is really important, not assuming that everybody thinks the same way across the board. I know we're working in same industries, we're seeing the same things, but still talking about I, representing yourself and giving space for other folks to represent themselves as well. Being present in this space, and with virtual spaces, I'm guilty of this. It is not easy to be present. You know, sometimes with the camera off, I'll have my email up, or I'll be working on other projects, but I'm asking folks as present as you possibly can be. We're only here for an hour, so please be present. Refrain from interrupting each other's. Again, I know in virtual spaces, it's really hard. It's hard to pick up on some of those social cues, but feel free to use the raise your hand feature, throw up a reaction, message me directly in the chat if there's something that you want to add on, if there's something that you want to say, but be cognizant of when other folks are sharing, and let's try not to speak over each other, which leads well into the next one around being cautious of the space that we take up. So we're here for a shorter time. We won't be engaging as much as I do in some of my other workshops. But if you want to share, if you want to answer questions, if you want to speak, just being cautious of, are you answering the questions first? Are you, for the last 5 questions, have you been the first person to speak? And if so, that doesn't mean silence yourself. It just means take a pause, wait 30 seconds, see if anybody else has something else to share before speaking up. Always being cautious of how sometimes we might unintentionally dominate conversations. And then lastly, I'm encouraging folks to just engage with courage and respect. So what's coming to mind, asking those difficult questions, but remembering that we're going to be respectful of each other in this space. So when we're thinking of our community guidelines, that is my initial working list. That is the list I have started. But does anybody want to add to this? Is there any guideline, any other rule of engagement or dynamic folks would want to add to this list before we proceed? And feel free to pop it in the chat. If there is, I'll check the chat. Yep, I'm seeing somebody in the chat said, acknowledge and accept each person's journey, experience as authentic for them. Exactly. So we're not going to invalidate folks. If they have different experiences, it's a different experience and we can acknowledge that. Any other things, anything else? Awesome. Well, this is a working list and exists throughout the workshop today. So if something does come up, sometimes somebody does something and I'm like, oh, I wish I said this in the beginning. So feel free to just continue to add to this list. But let's get into it. So today we are talking about microaggressions. And just to start off with the definition, microaggressions are the everyday, subtle, intentional, and oftentimes unintentional interactions or behaviors that communicate some sort of bias towards historically marginalized groups. And this is a definition coming from Kevin Nadal, who's a psychologist. And what I really like about this definition is twofold. The first part is that it emphasizes the subtle nature of microaggressions. It emphasizes that it's very different than overt racism. So overt racism is racial slurs or somebody outright saying, I don't like this person because of their race. But when we're talking about microaggressions, we're talking about subtlety. We're talking about things that are often so hard to identify unless you're somebody from that historically marginalized group or from that community that is being harmed by what is being said, done, or created. So microaggressions are about subtlety. And at times they might be intentional, but oftentimes they're unintentional. We don't intend to be microaggressive. We don't intend to harm people, but they're informed by these beliefs and biases that we carry because those beliefs and biases are informed by the world in which we exist in, a world that's not neutral. So when we're thinking about microaggressions, it's recognizing that they are subtle in nature and oftentimes very unintentional, but they're a reflection of beliefs and biases that are being perpetuated from generalizations and stereotypes about particular groups of people. When I think about microaggressions, there's 3 key forms of microaggressions that I really want to draw on today, because oftentimes we think microaggressions are solely verbal. Verbal microaggressions is when somebody says something rooted in an offensive or disrespectful stereotype or generalization toward a systemically marginalized community or group of folks. So this is about what we say. This is about the words that we use. And oftentimes when we talk about microaggression, we often think that microaggressions are solely verbal. And we can think of things of folks asking Black women if they can touch their hair, or saying, I don't see color, or I don't see race, or I don't see ability. Or if we think in the healthcare perspective, doctors denying Black women their experiences of pain because Black women tend to over-exaggerate pain or feelings of pain in accordance to how folks are seeing them within the healthcare system. So verbal microaggressions are about what we say, but they're not the only form of microaggressions that we interact with. In fact, we also see behavioral microaggressions being very real. And these aren't necessarily about what we say, but it's about our actions, problematic actions that uphold this belief that is rooted in identity stereotypes or generalizations. And so when we're looking at behavioral microaggressions, it's not so much about saying, you speak great English, although that person has lived in Canada their entire life. Behavioral microaggressions look like the behaviors, the way in which we behave. I think about a couple months ago, I went to a Black research symposium, and a scholar there was presenting on his experience in the interviewing Black nurses who were navigating COVID. They were navigating hospitals in Ontario and what their experiences were like. And a lot of the nurses spoke to significant behavioral microaggressions. Nurses with less experience spoke to the fact that they were the first on their team to receive COVID-19 patients, although they had less experience, and there were more experienced senior level nurses who could have taken on that role, which would have increased the level of safety that that patient was engaged with. But this disposable nature of Black nurses emphasized this need for them to be the first one to take on COVID-19 patients. Or some nurses spoke to the experience of how managers would walk around and console and hug and tell the other nurses, everything is going to be okay, you're going to make it through this. But nobody was coming to the Black nurses. Nobody was telling them everything was going to be okay. Nobody was telling them that they were going to make it through it. And these were the nurses with a disproportionately higher caseload of COVID-19 patients. And so it's not necessarily about what is being said in that moment, but it's about how folks are behaving. Folks are behaving in a way that makes those Black nurses feel as if they're less than. In that space and time, they're less than. This belief that Black nurses are disposable, this belief that Black nurses do not matter as much. And that's what's informing the behaviors of some folks. And then lastly, I'll speak to environmental microaggressions. And these are expressed in our society, in our systems, in our organizations, in the institutions that we create. And it's through a lack of diverse representation and also intentional inclusion. And Dion spoke to this a little bit of how we have to be intentional in our actions, intentional in how we create spaces. So environmental microaggressions speak to the way in which there's a lack of representation. You know, when we go to an organization and we see all of the diverse folks are represented in the entry level or the front line, but nobody is there present in leadership. And this was emphasized in that research. The nurses spoke to the fact that, you know, we are here, we are scared, we feel like we're not getting equal resources, nobody's hearing us, nobody's seeing us, and there's no nurse, there's no Black nurse in the leadership of our hospitals that we can go to who would understand the experiences of both Blackness in this institution. So we have nobody we can go to who has the power to make change and also understands our experiences. It can also look like something as simple as who's on your board? You know, the boards of organizations, seeing predominantly old, cisgendered, white folks represented on boards, but who are those organizations serving? Who are the communities they're serving? And why are they not represented on boards? So thinking critically about the systems that we create and how they're set up, and how it's not often folks saying, we don't want Black folks on our board, or we don't want people with disabilities as leaders, but it's how there's a lack of intention of how communities are being included in the work that's being done. And so when we think about microaggressions, oftentimes folks, again, think of microaggressions as it's this instance, it's this moment, it's something that I said, it's a behavior, it's something that I did, it's a moment in time. And we call them micro, and so we think that there are small moments in time. But microaggressions have long-lasting impacts on folks. They have long-lasting impacts on folks, and they also have long-lasting impacts on our society. As we remember, microaggressions are informed by beliefs that are rooted in generalizations and stereotypes that disproportionately harm systematically marginalized communities. And so when we look at how oppression manifests in this world, we can then better understand how microaggressions have a long-term impact, a larger impact. Oftentimes when we talk about what is racism, or what is sexism, or what is homophobia, people will speak to it is when you treat somebody poorly because of their race, or you treat somebody poorly because of their gender. Our definitions fall within the individual and interpersonal. That's how we often understand it. And so the solution there is, okay, if it's treating somebody poorly because of their race, then the best way to deal with racism is just avoid people who are mean, avoid people who will treat you poorly. But when we recognize that it also manifests systemically through our institutions and our structures and how they work with each other, then it goes from avoiding people who are mean and now steps into how do you avoid a system? How do you avoid an institution? And so our solutions are then also thought about on the institutional and systemic level. So the 4 components of oppression here, the first one is individual. And that is just a person's beliefs and actions. And this could be conscious, this could be unconscious, this could be externalized to other communities different to them. This could be internalized to their own community. But that individual piece is about our actions, our beliefs. Then it goes into interpersonal of how we treat other people that we perceive as different. How are we treating them? And that's where microaggressions often sit. They often sit in that space. But the impact of microaggressions is then systemic. because those very same beliefs then inform our policies, our practices, our institutions. And then those institutions start to work with other institutions that are also upholding those very same beliefs. And now we are living in a society that has structures that are working to disproportionately harm systematically marginalized communities. So an example of this, I want you to think of a girl named Alex. And Alex is somebody who thinks she's a great person, you know, great to her family and friends, but deep down, she subconsciously holds on to this belief that racialized folks are less intelligent and more violent. Alex is in high school. She's in school. She gets assigned to work with a new classmate that just got to that school. And Alex refuses. She says, I don't want to work with this person. This is not something I want to do. The teacher says, you have to work with her. And so Alex moves forward and ignores her, pushes her out of the assignment, ignores her suggestions, and just pushes through. This classmate of hers was Black. Alex holds on to that experience and says, I never want any other student to be in a position where they feel silenced or unheard by their teacher. And so Alex goes to school, she becomes a teacher, she rises the ranks, and now she's a principal of her own school. And as a principal of her own school, Alex says, I really want to create space where students are heard. So whenever a conflict arises between students, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit them down, we're going to have a conversation, listen to the perspectives, and then I'll discipline accordingly. And so Alex does this, but her informal practice disproportionately impacts racialized students. Because what we see is that when the students come in front of her, let's say there's a racialized student and a non-racialized student, oftentimes to the white student, she will give space, she will ask open-ended questions, she'll probe into their perspective, what happened, she'll ask questions to really understand the totality of their experience. But for the racialized student, she silences them. She asks yes or no questions, she silences them when they want to elaborate, because in her mind, she already believes that racialized folks are more violent. Therefore, she already believes that the racialized student is the aggressor. So Alex is sitting down, she's looking at the data, and she's realizing that racialized students are being suspended, expelled, and receiving detention at disproportionately higher rates than non-racialized students. And instead of thinking, how are my behaviors, how are my actions impacting this, she thinks this is a problem and we have to address it. So she calls local police. And we've heard of special resource officer programs, and this is when police officers come into schools, and when students are on a list where they've experienced high rates of detention or suspension, police officers now have the ability to stop and search them in the schools. And in that search, what they're looking for is weapons. And so again, the obvious conclusion might be here, okay, just don't carry a weapon on you. But oftentimes it's left up to the discretion of the officer of what is a weapon. So a pen, a pencil, a ruler, anything that's a sharp object or heavy can be considered a weapon. And instead of getting a detention or suspension, what happens to these kids is they now are facing criminal charges and going into juvenile detention centers. And so this example walks us through of how Alex is somebody who carries this inherent beliefs that are disproportionately harming racialized folks, how she perpetuates microaggressions that go unaddressed, and then gains power within systems to build policies and practices and work across institutions that are now working to harm those very same racialized folks, all informed by these beliefs. And so we may think microaggressions are something small of what we say or a behavior we acted in a moment. But in fact, they're shaping our societies, they're shaping our institutions, they're shaping our practices. And they're subtle in a way in which when they're not addressed in the interpersonal level, they're much harder to see when they exist in the systemic and the institutional level. And they're much harder to unpack when they exist in that level. Dion spoke to this as well around the impact of racial trauma. And so just to add on what Dionne already mentioned is that racial trauma psychologically impacts folks the same way as PTSD. Very similar symptoms we're seeing, where folks re-experience distressing events, where folks go through a chronic stress, hypervigilance, anxiety, depression. Folks are navigating these psychological impacts of going through racial trauma. And whether that is microaggression, whether that's interpersonal, or whether that's systemic, institutional, and structural, the impacts of racial trauma on our individual bodies has a psychological experience, a psychological impact that is long-term. And in addition to a psychological impact, it also has a physical one, where people who navigate racial trauma have higher rates of physical pain, cardiovascular disease, hypertension, and respiratory complications. And so we're seeing the very real impact of something that we are calling micro in its name, microaggressions, harming institutions and systems and how we support communities, but also harming the people themselves in a long-term, long-lasting way. And this isn't just for adults. This research demonstrates that kids as young as 12 years old are experiencing some of these psychological and physical impacts of racial trauma. So why do we do it? Because microaggressions aren't just something that's reserved for bad people. And as we spoke about in the beginning, they're often unintentional. Nobody's coming out and saying, this is a belief I carry, I don't like racialized folks, I don't like people with disabilities, I don't like women. People aren't carrying these mentalities outwardly. It's unintentional. It's something that is subliminal, and it's connected to implicit bias. Implicit bias is a form of bias that occurs automatically and unintentionally, but nevertheless affects judgments, decisions, and behaviors. And this is quite literally how our brain works. If you look at the neuroscience, this is how our brain works. Our brain makes neurological pathways. Our brain makes neurological shortcuts. So, for example, if we watch movies and TVs and we see a bear attacking people or other animals, and we see that as like, okay, a bear could kill me, So and next time when we face a bear, when we see a bear, we're not going to be like, okay, what movie did I see? What TV show? What story did my friend tell me? No, our brain will automatically see bear, danger, get away, which is great for survival instincts. It's great for inanimate objects. When we're driving and we see red, it's great that our brain says red, stop, instead of red, what did my driving instructor tell me? How many colors are on the traffic light? What should I do? How do I stop a car? But immediately we react because our brain has created these shortcuts. But when it comes to people, that's when the problems occur. When it comes to identity, that's where the issues occur. Because now we are applying identities, we're applying generalizations, we're applying stereotypes to identities, people that are vastly different from one another. And the problem here is that we have to think critically about what is informing these generalizations and stereotypes that we are applying to identities. What's informing these shortcuts that our brain is making about certain people, different people, people who are the same as us? What's informing? What messages are informing it? And this happens through the process of socialization. Socialization is the process through which people are taught to be proficient members of society. It describes the way that people come to understand societal norms and expectations, to accept society's beliefs and be aware of societal values. So through socialization, whether it's the TV we watch, the movies we watch, the books we read, the experiences we share with our families and our friends and the people who are around us, through socialization, we start to understand the world and we start to apply beliefs and values to particular people, people that are similar to us and people that are different to us. And so these are the subconscious messages that are then informing how we treat folks, especially folks who are different. Oftentimes, folks who are similar to us, we're more empathetic and we have a more nuanced, holistic understanding of their experiences because we understand ourselves, we see ourselves in them, and therefore chances are we're going to give them the benefit of the doubt. But folks who are different, especially when we are not giving space and time, like Dion mentioned, to engage with different cultures and different people and different practices, we're relying heavily on tools of socialization like media, social media, TV, movies, and books, all of which may have not even been crafted by the community that they're talking about. So if we look at Alex may have said, I'm not a bad person, but she's watching TV and she's seeing these representations of racialized people as violent. She's seeing these representations of racialized people as the class clown, the one who's always failing in class or making jokes or acting out. And she's applied this to all racialized folks. Because what's informed her perspective, what's informed her implicit bias is not neutral, it's biased in and of itself. Oftentimes I ask folks to think of a person. Imagine how you would define the characteristics of a criminal. Who is that person? What are their identities? How do they behave? We may think of a criminal as somebody who is bad, who is void of values and morals. But if we speak with critical legal scholars, we see that sometimes the law disproportionately discriminates against people who are experiencing poverty. And so how do we then marry this together where a mother who is stealing formula in order to feed her child is seen as a criminal, but we are educated, we are socialized to believe that all criminals are bad, all criminals are terrible people. It's not saying that one is right and one is wrong, but it's saying that both can exist, nuance can exist. Similarly, when we think about leaders, what makes a great leader? We often think of somebody who's charismatic, somebody who is extroverted, somebody who captures a room. But there's been some really great introverted leaders, folks who know that they are not the ones to speak at the front of the room, but they have the knowledge and understanding of how to strategically organize spaces and do the work in a way that creates inclusion. And so when we're hiring for leaders, when we're hiring for managers, how do we apply this picture of who we think is right instead of giving space to the possibility of what could be right? Similarly to the characteristics of a good parent, you know, growing up, my parents were working multiple jobs to care for us. And I often think of good parents are usually defined as, you know, parents who put healthy food on the table, parents who work through homework with their kids. But my parents weren't home when I was coming home. They weren't there, but they were working multiple jobs and going to school so that they could provide for us in the future. We also know, especially with inflation these days, and if you've been grocery shopping, you've seen the ridiculous prices of food, the high cost of produce. So if you're feeding a family on a budget, does that inherently then make you a bad parent because you cannot put the most nutritional food in front of your children? So thinking critically about how we define, and especially when we define characteristics and people in such binaries with absolutism, there's so much complexity and nuance. And oftentimes what microaggressions do is they eliminate that. They eliminate the complexity, they eliminate the nuance. And so what does it then look like to move forward? What are some actions that we can take? To be frank, this conversation alone could be hours long. There are so many actions, and we could break them down into line by line, specific by specific. But I think overall, there's 3 key actions that I want you folks to be able to walk away with of tangibly what you can do. And the first piece is around intention versus impact. So really stepping away from this idea that the intention behind our actions is more important than the impact of our actions. And what I think of is when I was doing a lot of work around disability, folks who are blind or visually impaired would speak to the fact that they would be out and about, living their best life, walking around on the streets in the public, and people would direct them. They would grab their elbows or their shoulder and they would direct them in particular ways. And they would speak of how terrifying that experience is. You're comfortable in your surrounding, you know where you're going, you know what you're doing, and all of a sudden an arm is grabbing you and directing you in a completely different direction, disorienting you. And of course, if you spoke to those people, they'd be like, well, I saw you were trying to get into that store, so I figured I would direct you into the store. Or I saw you were trying to get here, so I thought I would help you get there. These people had the best of intentions. They were just trying to support somebody who they thought needed help. But the impact of their actions was they caused fear, they caused harm, they scared somebody, they disoriented someone. So thinking critically about our intentions are great, but sometimes our actions have a negative impact. And if we harm somebody, we got to talk about the harm. We got to talk about the impact of our actions, not the intentions behind them. And especially if somebody calls it out. It's so scary to call out somebody who has harmed you, especially when they have power within your organization or your institution. Especially when they can feel small. I know we were sharing that before, you know, trying to call people out for the discrimination behind using or disregarding international experience. It's hard enough to call out harmful practices. But when that person responds with, but that's not what I intended to do. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I guess I'm a terrible person. It's eliminating the whole conversation about how we can do better moving forward and centering this conversation on feelings and how you feel guilty or intentions rather than impact. And what it does is it silences that person. It shuts that conversation down. It gives space for no growth and instead just circles on intention and guilt. So what do we do? What do we respond with instead? We respond with accountability. We have to hold ourselves accountable. And accountability is broken down into 4 steps. The first being recognizing the harm. When we do something that is harmful, we have to recognize it. If we saw somebody who was visually impaired and we thought that they were struggling to get where they were going, so we thought, let me guide them. But they said, that actually hurt me, that disoriented me, I was fine, you didn't have a conversation with me, you just grabbed me and directed me where you thought was right. We're no longer talking about the intention to provide help, and we're now talking about the impact that was harmful, whether intentional or unintentional. And once we can recognize that harm, we also have to give space to apologize. Not just apologizing to the person that was directly harmed, but also apologizing to folks that were indirectly harmed. Microaggressions are so subtle, but also so harmful. And they oftentimes take place sometimes in big spaces when we're in meetings, and somebody may say something that's really microaggressive, and everybody just kind of goes silent and looks at the person and sees if they want to address it, and they don't, and then they keep it pushing. And so I think of an example of a mother just came back from maternity leave, and they were going through a project. And the person at the front of the room, she was asking a lot of questions about the specifics and the detail of the project. And the person at the front of the room sent out the background information and thought that he had CC'd her in it. And so as she's asking questions, he says, "It must be mom brain, but I sent you an email with all of this information." She said she didn't receive it, but he said, "It must be your mom brain. It's okay. You'll get back into the hang of it." He goes, realizes did not CC her in the email at all. She had none of this information. And he realizes it's his fault. So he goes and apologizes to her behind closed doors. But that comment was made in a room full of other people. But he's apologizing now to her in closed doors. And sometimes this happens. People are microaggressive in a room full of people, and then they want to apologize behind closed doors. But to build a culture of accountability in an organization, we also need to apologize in front of the very folks who saw the harm, demonstrating that we are willing to hold ourselves accountable and that the behavior is not tolerable in the environments we're creating. So as much as it is important to go apologize to her behind closed doors, at the next meeting, I made a comment and it was honestly disrespectful, it was out of line, and I'm sorry for what I said. Acknowledging that we can harm multiple people indirectly when we create harm unintentionally. And then the last two steps here of accountability is really accepting our consequences, recognizing that consequences are different than punishment. Consequences are about boundaries and healing and giving space for those harmed, where punishment is about harming the person as much as they harmed you. And so sometimes consequences will escalate if folks aren't willing to take accountability for their actions, but consequences fixate on boundaries and healing. If somebody needs you out of the workplace in order to feel safe, then yes, you may get suspended. If somebody needs somebody to mediate a conversation in order to feel as if they can come to a solution, then yes, they may have to pull in your boss. So thinking critically about consequences being about healing and boundaries, not so much about punishment. And the last piece here, and the most important piece, is committing to change behavior. When we're thinking about accountability, we have to commit to changing, because then apologizing becomes the microaggression. If we're continuously just apologizing and apologizing, but doing the same thing over and over again, it gets to the point where it's like, we've had so many conversations, you know what you're doing is harmful, and you're just apologizing whenever you get caught and not about the actual harm. And so committing to change behavior is so, so important. And the way we can commit to change behavior is by doing the work. We're not going to rid ourselves of implicit bias passively. We're not going to rid ourselves of beliefs passively. We have to commit, intentionally do the work. We have to take control of our own journey of unlearning. And what this looks like individually is really building some of that self-awareness. When it comes to implicit bias, it's not a question of if we have implicit bias, it's how we have implicit bias. And so we have to then do that work to build some of that self-awareness around our biases. After this workshop, I have provided Timbit with a resource sheet. And in that resource sheet has the Harvard Implicit Association test. And that is a really great place to start. It's a really great place to start because it takes about 5 minutes to do a test. And it just opens your eyes up to the fact that, yeah, bias is real. I do this work, equity, diversity, and inclusion work. And this is what I've been doing for the last 10 years. And even doing those tests a week ago, I can still see that I carry bias. So how do I then intentionally address that bias instead of just pretending it's not there or wishing it would go away? And we can do that by learning about communities from communities. I spoke about socialization and how socialization is the ways in which we have attributed beliefs and values towards particular identities. And so then it's our responsibility to re-socialize ourselves. Oftentimes when we look at the narratives of marginalized communities in mainstream media, it's not stories that we built ourselves. So let's go to those communities, let's learn from them. This doesn't mean stopping Indigenous folks on the streets or Black folks on the streets. YouTube, Google, there's books, there's podcasts, there's blogs. There's so much that we can learn about the communities that we engage with the cultures that we engage with, so that our understandings are informed, dynamic, and nuanced, and not monolithic. We're not assigning one identity to all people who look or act or have this identity. And then organizationally, there's so much that can be done. First and foremost, looking at the outcomes of our traditional practices, our traditional systems. Oftentimes, like Dion mentioned, we rely on, oh, things have always been done this way. We always do it this way. But let's start to measure if the impact that we believe we're having is actually the impact we're having. Let's look at the outcomes of these systems. Are we supporting folks, or are folks feeling harmed? And there's so many ways to do this, picking one system and starting there, picking one policy and starting there, picking one practice and starting there, or pulling in a consultant or organization to support with your full wholesome assessment, looking specifically at inclusion. But we have to create spaces to understand what our systems are actually doing, not just what we believe they're doing or we hope that they're doing, but how do we get informed perspectives and data-informed perspectives so that we can say, this is the impact we're having. And also investing in both new knowledge and systemic change. Doing this work, I got hired a lot to do training, and a lot of folks want to do training, and I love training. Honestly, I love talking with folks. I love understanding experiences. I love hopping into a new sector. Training is a lot of fun, but I also recognize that training has to be coupled with systemic change. If we're saying policies and practices are harmful, then we have to change those policies and practices. We can't train people into changing those policies and practice. We have to do that work. And so thinking critically about when we're looking at organizationally how we make systems change, it's about creating those spaces where we can talk, unpack, understand new things like today, and then also stepping forward and saying, now that we have this new knowledge, how do we shape practices of accountability? How do we shape new practices that address or mitigate microaggressions? Because we can't learn new things and go back into the same systems. We have to adjust those systems as well. So as a quick recap of what I hope folks can take away from today. The first being that we all have implicit bias. We all have it, and therefore we are all susceptible to perpetuating microaggressions. It's not an us versus them thing. It's not a, I'm a good person and they're a bad person, so they do microaggressions. Microaggressions are implicit, they're unintentional, they're subconscious, and we all have implicit bias. And so when we recognize that, we need to recognize that it's not about, I can't tell you who you are as a person based off your one action, based off something you did or something you said. So it's not about your character. It's not, are you a good person or are you a bad person? It's about our actions. Our actions caused harm, so how do we start to address that harm? And we can address that harm by taking control of our learning, our unlearning and our learning journey, by practicing accountability with intention, and also acting with intention, thinking about the systems that we are building, the spaces we are creating, how we are treating the folks we engage with. Because when we act with intention, we create safer and better spaces for diverse people and diverse experiences. So I want to thank you all for giving me some time to speak today. I know it was a lot of information to get through rather quickly, but I am more than happy to open up the floor if folks have any questions that they want to ask, anything that's coming up for you, anything you want to push or challenge, happy to hear.
Suzanne, could you stop sharing the screen just so we could see everyone, please?
Yeah, sure.
And we have a question from Sujaba.
Yes, go for it.
Hi, no, it's not a question. I just wanted to say this was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful presentation. I learned so much. And the thing that I will take away is attention for. Sometimes you forget, like you might do something wrong, but like you think to yourself, oh, that was not my intention, but it doesn't matter if that was your intention or not, because I mean, you caused harm to someone. So you just have to put that aside and apologize and make sure, like you said, not to do it again and again and apologize again and again, because then it means nothing.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And honestly, easier said than done. I completely, I recognize that too. It's so easy to say, I didn't intend to do that, but I agree. It's about taking that, just practicing that, flexing that muscle of, okay, step away from intentions, let me address the harm. Daniel.
Yeah, hi Suzanne, thanks again. It was wonderful. I feel like I could almost take an exam and pass and get a degree or something between you and Dion's presentation. It's so much really great information and so timely. This is not a pushback, I guess, but I kind of want to get a better understanding. In one of your earlier slides, you said something, it was a quote from somebody, and it was about microaggressions, and part of the quote says something like, or sort of mostly, or something like that, unintentional. Was some of the wording of that earlier slide, and I didn't like that because just in my own experience, people who are being microaggressive, in my experience, have been people who know full well what they're doing, and I don't see how that's unintentional. And I also think that microaggression is a power thing. It comes from white supremacy, and people, you know, I say unintentional. I hesitate to say they may not know they're doing it, but I don't know if unintentional would be the word I would use. There's a reason why somebody says, you know, why a white lady says to a black lady, "Can I touch your hair?" There's a reason for that. That's not unintentional. So anyways, that's the only thing I was going to say. I don't like the idea of it being unintentional because I don't see that. My experience has been that people who do it know what they're doing.
Yeah, thank you. I think for me, the way I see it, so one, retweet everything about white supremacy. The whole idea of microaggressions, like the people who perpetuate microaggressions are the folks who carry power and privilege in this world. We can't negate how power plays a role in microaggressions in and of itself. The unintentional component, though, comes back to that person who is asking, because in instances where I've literally been walking down the street and a white woman was like, "Oh my gosh, can I touch your hair?" I'm just like, and she's reaching and I'm like, "I don't know you, ma'am. I don't know where your hands are, like you cannot pet me." In those moments, it is what she believes is being kind and courteous and inquisitive about diverse people, but is actually causing harm to me. And so it's an unintentional action where she doesn't recognize she's causing harm, but that harm is actually happening. Whereas sometimes, and that's what I liked about that definition, where it gave space for both intentional and unintentionality, because sometimes people you'll call them out and say, "What you're doing is microaggressive." And then they'll say, "Well, no one's going to fire me for it. No, I'm not being held accountable for it. I won't lose friends." Like there's no level of accountability in their life. So they're like, if it's just hurting you, I don't care about hurting you. So I'm going to continue doing it because I'm not being held accountable at all for my actions. So there's a component of both, where sometimes folks will be like, "Oh, I'm being kind," or "It's a compliment. You speak such great English. Like I'm being so kind," or like, "You're so articulate. I didn't expect that." But it's like there is the subliminal lines, the subliminal messaging. And once they know about it, then they have that decision of, do I care enough to change? And sometimes they'll intentionally be like, "I don't, so I'm going to continue doing it."
Yeah, if I may just add one thing there, Suzanne, I think that people who do it, one of the things that makes me sort of, because microaggressions, the problem with microaggressions, I guess, is because they are microaggressions, sometimes we don't necessarily pick up on them. But what I do is I use two things. The first thing I do is, if I feel, if I get a reaction, if my body reacts in some way to what just happened here, that's the first part. Then I question, would that person have said that to somebody who didn't look like me? And that's my second check. And if I check both of those things, then that to me was a microaggression. Again, you know, I understand you say that sometimes they don't recognize that it's a microaggression, and that's the unintentional piece. I recognize that. Thank you so much.
Yes, yeah, no problem at all. And yes, I think at that point, and a resource that I also included in the resource document that will be sent out after this also includes how folks can respond, because there's one piece of like, we perpetuate microaggressions, but then there's also just like, it's really not fun to receive them on the regular. And so I included an article there about what it looks like to create space for ourselves when we're navigating microaggressions, and how we can just, you know, hold ourselves accountable or hold others accountable, but also just like create safety in our environment. We don't have to be the leader of every charge. Yeah. Awesome. Are there any more questions or comments? I'm seeing some comments in the chat. Yes, I'm seeing some additions around ignorance or lack of education or knowledge because they don't face it. They don't see it as wrong. Exactly. Folks are agreeing and thanking. Thank y'all for being present. Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, I will pass it back.
So thank you so much for such a wonderful presentation, so much information there and really helping us unpack microaggressions and giving us the steps on how to be accountable and how to do the work. So I'm sure that folks have taken away a lot of information. So thank you for that. As Suzanne mentioned, there will be a resource list included in the post-workshop email that we'll be sending. That also includes the recording of this workshop, as well as an evaluation form for Suzanne's portion of this workshop. So if folks are inclined to fill it out, we would encourage you to do so. And this is part of our series, so please keep an eye out for our upcoming sessions. But again, I want to thank you, Suzanne, for such a wonderful session, and thank folks for being here today with us. I hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you. Bye, all.